Music is found in every known culture, the most isolated tribal groups. It exists. And so we evolved. We invented it deep into our ancestral past. And that evokes the question of why. What's its purpose? What is so important about it that we would develop it and we would evolve parallel to it in all places? No culture exists without music. A culture's music is influenced by all other aspects of itself, including social, economic organization and experience, climate, access to technology, of course. We're an example of that. This is an example of that. The emotions and ideas that music expresses, the situations in which music is played and listened to, and the attitudes towards music players and composers all vary between regions and periods. So there's a lot of nuances, there's subgenres, a lot of ways of dissecting what music is, but it's inevitable that you're going to find it where you find people. It's probable that the first musical instrument was undoubtedly the human voice, which can make a vast array of sounds, from singing to humming, why did I do that? Whistling, which I can't do, through clicking, coughing, yawning. As for other musical instruments, in 2008, archaeologists discovered a flute made out of a bone in the Hohlfels cave near Ulm, Germany, considered to be about 35,000 years old. The 5-holed flute has a V-shaped mouthpiece and is made from a vulture wing bone. And of course, birds' bones are very low density, and I think they're mostly hollow, right? What enables them, what doesn't drag them down to the ground. The oldest known wood pipes were discovered near Greystones, Ireland, in 2004. A wood-lined pit contained a group of 6 flutes made from yew wood, between 30 and 50 centimeters long. American, I don't know how long that is. Tapered at one end, but without any fingering holes. Without any finger holes. It's been suggested that the Divge, D-I-V-G-E, Babe flute, a cave bear femur dated back to 43,500 years old, is the world's oldest musical instrument. It was produced by Neanderthals. This was on Wikipedia, so citation needed, but wouldn't that be interesting? We jacked their culture and we murdered them to extinction. How nice of us. But some critique this claim, suggesting that the holes in the femur were actually probably just maybe gnawed by carnivores trying to get to the marrow. So I'll let your imagination decide which is more probable. So now from methodbehindthemusic.com/history. Prehistoric music. The earliest forms of music, of non-vocal music, were probably drum-based, percussion instruments being the most readily available at this time, like, I think that's like probably another innate, it's one of the big triggers that Raffy Taffy does. It's just, drumming and tapping on things. it is very instinctual almost. It's like you just, at least for me. Actually, I got this. Keep my coins in here. Maybe I'll do an episode on this. You can imagine how that would have evolved, how that would have been generated. The genesis of that, I mean, we killed an animal. We can't eat their fur, so we probably had the fur laying out. It was maybe we were drying it and we were stretched out over. It was stretched out over a something hollow, maybe something that we carry water in. And the next thing you know, we started tapping on it. Who knows? Maybe that's how it happened. I feel like most human inventions happen by accident, like gum, LSD, all the same, right? The earliest forms, so they were probably drums, percussions. There was no notation, the simplest of simple instruments are thought to have been used in religious ceremonies as representations of animals, because no doubt we feel our emotions are very, very much intertwined with our imaginations. And in ceremonies and dances and rituals, looked at from afar, from our technologically saturated society, I know I used to look at them as like kind of ridiculous, but then if you actually think about it, that was a powerful way of storytelling, Just imagine being under the stars, under a clear sky, thousands of years ago. No artificial lights. The only thing you have is maybe a bonfire in the middle of a bunch of people who are intimately linked to you and your identity. You're exposed to the elements, you're in the weather, you feel the wind. You have a smattering of, tens of thousands of sharp stars, lights, beams of light, diamonds in the black velvet sky. And you're immersed in this experience, and then a bunch of drums start. Repeating a pattern and a rhythm, and it kind of starts getting you, and of course you're susceptible to this because you're letting this experience happen to you. You're not denying it. That's half of hypnosis, I guess. So, and then a story starts getting told. And maybe even not through words, maybe through dance. And you're just very familiar with the story. So you're just like when you're reading a book, your brain actively fills in all the gaps that is missing in the description, of the environment in which the action takes place. And that could have a profound effect on you, And it's no mystery how music, dance, and art, just art in general, is very, very intimately linked with transmitting profound ways, wisdom about how to live in the world, And I still think that's the case. I mean, growing up, I learned a lot about the world through great songs, great artists. So anyways, it's something that needs to be respected in my mind. So there's no notation, undoubtedly, or writing of this kind of music, and its sounds can only be extrapolated from the music of the South American Indians and African natives who still adhere to some of the ancient religious rituals. Now, from drumconnection.com, here's actually history of African rhythms. Here's a quick aside, and I wrote it as though I was going to read the script word for word. And speaking of the music of the African natives, the amount of prehistoric and perhaps even pre-human perspective we can gain from studying their timeless rituals isn't something to ignore, especially since most of it likely contains the roots of music and ceremony of all other culture on earth. We originated in Africa, and no doubt we can, if we're eager to understand the roots of music, looking at the contemporary natives there probably wouldn't hurt. As in all prehistoric societies, African music has a long history that has been orally transmitted from one generation to the other, and the art of listening has been an important skill that's been perfected by these oral traditional practices. And this is actually fascinating when placed in the context of what skills were crucial to survive and thrive, when living on the primeval exposed landscape that we used to call home, before villages, even towns and walled cities emerged. The ability to pay attention, whether to the looming weather, a nearby stalking predator, a cat, a lion, a gator, or a croc over there, or to one's elders, who had valuable information to be transmitted about how to live and how not to die, must have been one of the ultimate indicators of successful reproduction and flourishing in our deep past. Perhaps this ability was so crucial to our identity that it's how we came to develop consciousness. Anyways, a number of African musical songs and dances are still transmitted from one generation to the next by word of mouth. So undoubtedly these can give us a lot of insight into the history of the human species that we never completely know. We're a little bit removed from, for those of us who don't voluntarily expose ourselves to the wild enough from time to time. We kind of lose an understanding of the environment in which some of our deepest cultural artifacts evolved. And while we think of music and dance as being distinct things that just cooperate during these ancient ceremonies, ancient Africans didn't separate their everyday life activities from their music and their other cultural experiences. Dr. Stone in 1998 attests to the difficulty of separating music from the cultural context. As she says, quote, "Honest observers are hard-pressed to find a single indigenous group in Africa that has a term congruent to the usual Western notion of music per se by itself. There are terms for more specific acts, like singing, playing instruments, and more broadly performing, dance, games, music. Performing music, meaning. But the isolation of musical sound from other arts proves a Western abstraction, something unique to our perspective of music, of which we should be aware that when we approach the study of these African performances, we might not have an accurate perception. It might not be as accurate if we're actually trying to put ourselves in the shoes of those who live and breathe this cultural practice. This to me is a profound observation and of just how integral music and dance is to our world perception. A propensity to make and be in awe of music and passion is deeper than we may be able to bear living without. If you just imagine not having music in movies or music at all, we probably wouldn't have dance. Probably, there's a lot of things we wouldn't have. I couldn't think of another thing, but if we still had other cultural artifacts without music, they would no doubt be drastically different they would be a lot more lame. They would be way more lame. Life would be lame. And lastly, although there isn't much more that I found regarding the further evolution of music in Africa by itself, it can't be stressed enough that the African influence on jazz, reggae, rhythm and blues, hip-hop, all these forms that dominate Western culture, can't be discounted. They genuinely can't be discounted. In fact, jazz is a kind of musical fusing of elements from such widely differing sources as European harmony, Euro-African melody, and African rhythm into a kind of improvisational style based on a fixed rhythmic foundation. Its beginnings can be traced to the black musicians in the French quarters of the city of New Orleans in around 1890, it's like 120 years ago. And jazz, of course, is the foundation upon which the blues, then rock, and now hip-hop is based. So again, from my perspective, the division between spiritual, religious worship and the hypnotic effect of live music on concert goers is a hard line to draw, But back to the music history proper. As for more advanced instruments, their evolution was slow and steady. It's known that by 4000 BC, the Egyptians had created harps and flutes, and by 3500 BC, lyrics and double-reeded clarinets had been developed. In Denmark, by 2500 BC, an early form of trumpet had actually been developed. This trumpet is what is known as a natural trumpet. It's valveless. It depends completely on manipulation by the lips to change the pitch. In fact, this was what Thor was depicted playing in the book of Norse myths that I read. I had to return it to the library. Maybe I'll check that out again soon. Now, one of the most popular instruments today is the guitar. It was created, the general concept of having the use of frets to change the pitch of a note, of vibrating strings, using vibrating strings, was thought of by the Hittites in 1500 BC, and putting together you can make a chord. chords together make a melody. I'm talking about the guitar. And it's just so cool that, this general concept was thought of 3,500 years ago. And then by 700 BC, there are actually records of songs that contain vocals as well as the recorded music, and this added a whole new dimension to music after that, technically called, I guess, accompaniment. And so the song, hopefully again, you're hearing now is the oldest extant, which is another word for existing, song called the Hurrian Hymn No. 6. It's an ode to the goddess Nicole, and was composed in cuneiform by the ancient Hurrians sometime around the 14th century BC. The clay tablets containing the tomb were excavated in 1950 from the ruins of the city of Ugarit in Syria. Along with a near-complete set of musical notations, they also include specific instructions for how to play the song on a type of 9-stringed lyre. Hurrian Hymn No. 6 is considered the world's earliest melody. But the oldest musical composition to have survived in its entirety is a 1st century AD Greek tune, now known as the Psychlos epitaph. The song was found engraved on an ancient marble column used to mark a woman's gravesite in Turkey. It says, "I am a tombstone, an image. Psychlos placed me here as an everlasting sign of deathless remembrance." The column also includes musical notations as well as a short set of lyrics that read, "While you live, shine. Have no grief at all. Life exists only for a short while, and time demands its toll." Was that meant to rhyme? I'm always fascinated at how something that rhymes in one language can be translated into a new language and it still rhymes and still be made to rhyme, Even with the intention, it's still interesting how they can find other words that mean the same thing and still rhyme. I'm blown away by it. The well-preserved inscriptions on the Psychlos epitaph have allowed modern musicians and scholars to recreate its plaintive melodies, note for note. Dr. David Crease of the University of Newcastle performed it using an 8-stringed instrument with a mallet. An ancient musical researcher, Michael Levi, has recorded a version strummed on a lyre. There have also been several attempts to decode and play Hurrian Hymn No. 6. But because of the difficulties in translating the ancient tablets, there's no definitive version, but the one I'm playing now is, to me, the most beautiful. It's simple, melodic. So music in Rome, ancient Greece and Rome. Now, Greece was the root of all classical art, so it's no coincidence that classical music is rooted in Grecian innovations. In 600 BC, the enigmatic ancient Greek figure of Pythagoras, with mathematical devotion, laid the foundations of our knowledge of the study of harmonics, which is on here. That's all the strings open, but on the 12th fret, if you don't press all the way down, I guess the vibrations of the strings come in complete harmony at certain points on the guitar, because down here they don't work. Interesting how that works. But Pythagoras was a genius. I mean, he devoted his entire life to mathematics and discovered some things like the Pythagorean theorem, for instance, that he genuinely didn't want to tell people. He kept it secret because he was so scared of the profundity of the meaning of it. So harmonics is how strings and columns of air vibrate, how they produce overtones, how the overtones are related arithmetically to one another, etc. It was common to hear of music of the spheres, that phrase from Pythagoreans. He dissected music as a science and developed the keystone of modern music, which was the octave scale. I guess guitar follows that scale. Again, I'm no theorist at all, so I don't know. But musical notes do repeat, so I can play an E all the way up here and right here. And it's cool, and it kind of works all around the guitar. I can play an open E or A and it right here. So the octave repeats every 8 notes, roughly, or really precisely, I guess. The importance of this event is obvious. Music was a passion for the Greeks. With their surplus of leisure time in the Golden Age, thanks to slave labor, of course, they were able to cultivate great artistic skills. Trumpet competitions were actually common in spectator events. They were probably spectacular too, by about 400 BC, so around the time of Plato and Socrates. It was in Greece that the first bricks of the foundation of the layers of musical theory were laid. Aristotle wrote on music theory scientifically and brought about a method of notation in 350 BC. The work of that genius is still studied today. So the next significant step in music's evolution was by Boethius in 521 AD. He brought the Greek system of notation to Western Europe, allowing the musicians there to scribe accurately the folk songs of their lands. Incidentally, it was Boethius who first wrote the idea of the opera. It's particularly interesting to note that at a certain point, Plato complained. He had complained about the new music of his own time. I clearly didn't refine this script. I was kind of all around, so forgive me, but the point is that the evolution of music, it takes a while, sometimes because music is good and people aren't creative enough, maybe, but primarily I would guess it's because, like anything traditional that works, it's hard to get most people to accept a new version of it, or an improvement or an evolution of it nonetheless. And so Plato, one of the pinnacles of thought in art and philosophy and even science of his day, said, our music was once divided into its proper forms, it was not permitted to exchange the melodic styles of these established forms and others. Poets who had natural talent but were ignorant of laws of music decided themselves into thinking that there was no right or wrong way to play music, that it was to be judged good or bad purely by the pleasure that it gave. By their works and their theories, they infected the masses with the presumption to think themselves adequate judges of what is good. And that's what Plato said. So clearly he had an elitist mentality, and in a way, if you devote your life to making music, I don't know, how terrible the music on radio generally is a pretty good argument for leaving the canonical judgments of what is good to people who actually play it, but it's just a passing thought. It's not all bad, though, on radio, I suppose. This proves the intimacy of music and spiritual sensation. I'm glad dismissal of Plato's dogmatic adherence to his theory of music culminated in our own modern diversity of our oral art. But there's no doubt that he may have been right, at least to revere its psychological essence. And although music revolutions were occurring in his time, it's clear that the change came slowly. In fact, it's commonplace in musicology to say that harmony, in the sense of a developed system of composition in which many tones at once contribute to the listener's experience. So it's commonplace in musicology to say that harmony, in the sense of a developed system of composition, in which many tones at once contribute to the listener's expectation of resolution, was invented in the European Middle Ages, and that the ancient cultures had no developed system of harmony. That is, for example, playing the third and seventh above the dominant, in order to create the expectation for the listener that the tritone will resolve to the third. And I don't really know what that means, but I do understand the general concept is what if I attach the intro, I don't know if I will, but it's just the general progression, I believe, of chord structures that make you anticipate a resolving note at the very end. So you would expect that final note, or this one I think I used. So if I don't play it now, I played it there. Why did I do that? You see. It just doesn't have the same effect as when you really drive it home with the final note. You know? So, Plato's Republic even notes that the Greek musicians sometimes played more than one note at a time, although this was apparently considered a very advanced technique. So music in the Middle Ages now, go back to Boethius. Most of the music created after the fall of Rome in 476 AD was commissioned by the Church. The Catholic religion had a long history of involvement, for better or for worse, with the musical arts. In 600, Pope Gregory had the Schola Cantorum built. This was the first musical school in Europe. And, actually, Andy, I guess I'll probably insert your beautiful melody that you made for the channel here. I listened to some girl on YouTube the other day singing in an empty huge stone cathedral, and the reverb on it is, I'm just a sucker for reverb. It sounded so good. So meanwhile in China, music was progressing also. It was reported that in 612 AD, there were orchestras with hundreds of musicians performing for those sordid dynasties. Although the specific music from the period is unknown, the distinct style supposed to have developed there is reflected even in orchestral Asiatic pieces of today. By 650, a new system of writing was developing using neumes, Neumes, as a notation for groups of notes in music. 144 years after the Schola Cantorum was built and established, a singing school opened in the monastery of Fuda, fueling the interests in musical vocation. And by 790 AD, there were splinters, I guess I could stop saying AD now. There were splinters of the Schola Cantorum in Paris, Cologne, and Metz. In 800, the great unifier Charlemagne, the leader of the French, the guy was crazy, had poems. He's crazily influential. He's just like nothing, like the Rome falls, and then nothing, maybe Muhammad, and then nothing, Charlemagne, and then like 600 years later, then we have like interesting stuff happening again. So I might do an episode on Charlemagne. But anyways, in 800, Charlemagne had poems and psalms set to music. In 850, Catholic musicians had a breakthrough by inventing church modes. These modes would later metamorphose into today's major and minor scales. In 855, the first polyphonic, which means two unrelated melodies and voices at once, piece was recorded, and by like 200 years later, in 1056, this polyphonic style replaced the Gregorian chants that we're probably listening to right now as the music of choice, even after the church made polyphonic music illegal, and even though this ban was later lifted. What was this called? The Devil's Note? A tritone, that's what it was. So Adam Neely. Yeah, I don't want to mess up my mic setup, but it's called this really cool video. It's only 10 minutes long, but it's called "The Devil in Music: An Untold History of the Tritone." And I guess it's Forbidden Notes. See if we can hear it real quick. I forget what it is though. Is it like no, I have no idea what it is. That's what it is. Okay.
Listening to the opening phrases of Camille Saint-Saëns' Danse Macabre, or the Dance of Death.
Okay. The Dance of Death. Yeah, we've all heard that. So it's a note it sounds dissonant. It's like harmony is where notes come in concert and they sound consonant. They amplify each other. The waves sit nicely they superimpose nicely on top of one another, and whereas dissonance is when two things are slightly out of harmony with one another. I don't think that hand movement really shed any light on it, but in 980, the great, anyways, that it's definitely worth checking out. The Devil's Music, the Devil in Music, An Untold History of the Tritone. So in 980, the great tome Antiphononium, a little extra syllable in there, Antiphononium Codex Montpellier was scribed. I don't know why I included that. Didn't have anything else written about it. In 1000, Guido de Arezzo made many improvements in music theory. He first improved and reworked standard notation to be more user-friendly. So Guido de Arezzo first improved and reworked standard notation to be more user-friendly by adding time signatures. He invented solfege. This is the vocal note scale. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. I think. This intonation has affected almost every modern vocalist except me. In 1100, a new secular movement began. This separation of church from music was a straddling one, and soon this new folk music was looked down upon as pagan and borderline blasphemous. The Renaissance now, moving on. On the dawn of the Renaissance in 1465, the printing press was first used to print music. Oh, the way I wrote that made it sound like that was the first thing it was used for. But no, it was in that year was the first time music was printed. By using a press, a composer could organize his pieces and profit from them with great ease. In 1490, Boethius's writings on opera were republished in Italian. With the onset of the Renaissance, the rules of music were about to change drastically. This was the beginning of a new enlightened age that would showcase some of the greatest musical minds ever produced. One of the most revolutionary movements in the era took place in Florence in the 1570s and 1580s, those 2 decades, with the work of the Florentine Camerata, who ironically had a reactionary intent, dissatisfied with what they saw as contemporary musical depravities. Their goal was to restore the music of the ancient Greeks. The fruits of their labors was a form known today as opera. The first operas, written around 1600, also defined the end of the Renaissance and the beginning of the Baroque eras. There wasn't a lot of money flowing around. Music prior to 1600 was modal rather than tonal. Several theoretical developments late in the 16th century led directly to the development of common practice tonality, and major minor scales began to predominate over the old church modes. So music after 1600, beginning with the tonal music of the Baroque era, is often referred to as belonging to the common practice period. I don't know what that means, but it sounds legit. The Baroque era took place from 1600 to 1750, as the Baroque artistic style flourished across Europe, and during this time, music expanded in its range and complexity. Here, multiple simultaneous independent melody lines were used, also called counterpoint. The late Baroque style was polyphonically complex and richly ornamented. Important composers from the Baroque era included Bach, let's go with their full name, Johann Sebastian Bach, Arcangelo Corelli, Girolamo Frescobaldi, George Friedrich Handel, and Antonio Vivaldi. The music of the classical period. This is characterized by a homophonic texture, or an obvious melody with accompaniment. These new melodies tended to be almost voice-like and singable, allowing composers to actually replace singers as the focus of the music. And I think I read somewhere that Mozart, it was one of the famous composers, was writing accompaniments, and there was one operatic female he didn't really like, and she always moved her head up or down depending on the lowness or highness of the pitch of the notes she was singing. So he deliberately devised and composed a piece in which she, which had so many variations from low to high, purely so that she would have to move her head a whole lot during the performance. And so he deliberately apparently made a point to make a lot of drastic differences between notes, just to have a nice chuckle at her expense. I forget where I read that. Probably heard that somewhere. Hopefully it's true. So now, the Romantic period. The Romantic period. Music became more expressive and emotional, expanding to encompass literature, art, and philosophy. Famous early Romantic composers include Schumann. Famous early Romantic composers include Schumann, Chopin, Mendelssohn, Bellini, and Berlioz. The late 19th century saw a dramatic expansion in the size of the orchestra and in the role of concerts as part of urban society. Famous composers from the second half of the century include Johann Strauss II, Brahms, and Wagner. The history of music at this point is best told by the styles that emerged as music became more and more divorced from religion proper. I say, the nominal version of religion is becoming removed, but not completely extinguished, because I think we've all had intimations of the divine when we're listening to a really profound piece, maybe alone in a car, on a long trip, or deep into the night, maybe first thing in the morning, in the peace and solitude of early dawn, music can really affect you. And I don't think that element has ever been detached from truly enduring music. So, and this here is the part where it starts to get really personal. And I don't really continue with the history of music beyond this part, mainly because it just goes off into so many different directions, and I feel like that would be enough for a whole episode in itself. But I just wanted to convey the depth at which music resonates with me. I've gotten goosebumps, I'm sure we all have. I've been choked up. I've even teared up at some of my favorite music, especially during my darkest times, It's so weird that something, like as seemingly innocuous as music can affect us so deeply. I wrote, it's like the deeper I went into a sad state, that right music, that perfect score, song I was listening to, it shone a beam of light that wouldn't have been able to penetrate so profoundly if it were not listened to in that specific mood. If I was listening to it in a really good, unaffected state, it probably wouldn't have been as deep. Unfortunately, I don't know nearly as much music as I'm sure I would love to. And there's music waiting to be the soundtrack of my daily life. I really latch on to music when I find someone I like. So, in the hopes that I'll inspire somebody out there to listen to the little bit that I know and I know is good for me, I'll tell you my favorites. Boards of Canada, number 1. My Morning Jacket, Alabama Shakes, Incubus, they have some great ones. The Black Keys, great. Sublime, that guy had passion, as superficial as some of the people who might listen to him are. Wow, it is gusting outside. Sublime I think is really awesome, and they have a lot of, I don't know, I don't want to get into a breakdown, a critique of every band, but I think the original Sublime is not given as much credence. I think they're equally as good, if not better, than Nirvana, and they're always way down on the list of like famous 90s bands. Bibio and Clark, those are two electronic artists that are mixed up with Boards of Canada on the Warp record label. I really enjoy their music. Modest Mouse, of course. You gotta love Dramamine. The Pixies. The Pixies are really, really good. They're super original, and they deserve to be even more well known, I think. Some of the greats you all are gonna most likely agree with: Led Zeppelin, Jimi Hendrix, Sam Cooke, that guy was good, Otis Redding. And I didn't realize Otis Redding, he died young. He might have been in the 27 Club but he was definitely not 30. And his voice sounded like he was 50, you know? Or it sounds like he was when he recorded that, but yeah, it's just unique. I mean, and then of course Chuck Berry, James Brown, a lot of people from that era. Again, in the more ambient, eclectic, Animal Collective. I love that song, My Girls. Hip hop. Sublime's song KRS-One got me to check out KRS-One, the actual rapper, hip hop artist, and that guy is awesome. That guy is, I don't know. I just learned so much about hip hop from him. And then of course, you know, Tupac and Biggie. More recent ones, Nipsey Hussle. He's just inspiring. His music is awesome, and his story is an awesome one. I did a whole video on him like a year ago, so if you care to search Let's Find Out in Nipsey Hussle, I think you might find that. But yeah, he's completely independent, and I think that's super cool because I didn't realize. And he's independent, so it's just, if you're an artist thinking about making music, just keep in mind how much money record companies steal from you in these crazy contracts, and you oftentimes sign the rights to your own creative compositions, you know, the songs you create. You just sign them away, so you actually don't own them, and you can't even make money on them in a lot of these terrible deals. And Nipsey Hussle really shed light on what it is to be your own label, and it's really cool to retain ownership. And I think he was affected, educated, influenced is the word, by Jay-Z in that respect. Kendrick Lamar, I like him. I like what Post Malone's doing. I think his story is pretty cool too. He just has a passion for music, and the dude is he's just very forthright, you know, like whatever you think of him, he's not as deceptive as most people would come across in who are celebrities, you know. If you like him, go watch. I watched both of his, or all of his, H3H3 podcast appearances. That guy's just super cool. He's just very, just comes across as very genuine, which I respect. And then Death Cab for Cutie, Blink-182, the first 3 Weezer albums. And then after that, I don't really care for him. This guy, Com Truise, it's a play on Tom Cruise. He makes 80s synthwave type music. Love him. This death metal band I used to be obsessed with called Opeth. I don't know if you call them death metal exactly, but they're a Swedish metal band, and they fuse blues and death metal somehow. They're really cool and unique. And of course, along that same vein, the first couple Metallica albums, really Kill 'Em All is the most fun to listen to. You know, Dave Mustaine was probably a big impact on that, so I like some of his Megadeth records too. Dream Theater is kind of cool. You know, some of the older Black Sabbath, Iron Maiden. I don't know too many else along those lines. Neil Young, Bob Dylan, I like their folksy song. Gordon Lightfoot, My Bloody Valentine, they're pretty cool. the Minutemen. The Minutemen are pretty cool punk rockers. At least they were. They're actually the people who wrote the theme song Corona for Jackass. Oh yeah, there's this ambient soft trance artist. I guess the actual guy's name is Wolfgang Voigt, but he goes under the name Gas, G-A-S. And it's it's so hard to explain, but it's like listening to EDM, boom, 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 but from 2 doors down, or like right outside with the doors closed in a small venue. It's like really muffled, and then it's very ambient, not really melodic, but just this like literally ambient, like just ambient sounds in a very atmospheric, dynamic relation between the two. I don't know how to explain it really, but yeah, I would check them out if you like. I study to that. I use that music to read, drown out other sound a lot, and of course Aphex Twin, who I use all the time in these videos. I'm sure there's plenty I missed, but all these artists in particular have at least have a couple of songs that have absolutely taken over my brain and propelled me into a subconscious state of pure experience as I wrote. And it is true, of emotion and understanding. It's like music really helps you cut through the rational part of your brain and go right into the feeling part. And in a lot of ways, that matters more than the rational part, you know? You can rationalize a lot of weird stuff, but what truly matters is what brings the most meaning into your life. And for me, that's the love and the effects of the love that I have for my friends and family and my girlfriend, and in the desire and hopefully action of making their lives easier and better. And music really, it makes me feel the love for other people. Music, it makes me, it connects me with that feeling. It makes me feel more integrated with those emotions when it's a good song. Yeah, it helps me understand my life experiences, my relationships, my faults, my virtues. It's enabled me to define those that are most meaningful. And meaning always comes back to who I share these most profound experiences with. So I hope you're glad that I shared this with you. Music is a permanent manifestation of our contact with the divine, whatever that really means. And we all share that in common, if nothing else. So I'd like to hear your favorites. Give me your favorite artists in the comments. Definitely, I want to learn some new music. I'm always all ears for new, good music. And I'm signing off, guys. So thanks for watching. I appreciate the love, all the likes, the comments, the subscriptions. It's cool to be able to connect with so many of you. So I love it. I just want you guys to relax and sleep well. So happy holidays for those of you watching now. And Merry Christmas. Happy New Year's. And until next time, sleep well, guys. Bye. And the emotion of awe. Man, music often makes us feel like crying. If you're like me and listen to good, when you're listening to really good music. To be honest with you, that's where ambient music comes in for me. Maybe I like this song. This is a good one. It kind of gets me every time. Oh, take me home. Home is whenever I'm with you. Oh, Alabama, Arkansas. Not the way that I do love you. June, do you remember the time when you fell out the window and nearly broke your back? Alright, yeah, that song gets me. That's a powerful song. So that's music, guys. That's music in 7 easy steps. Oh, musical anticipation. I missed 5 and 6. That's an auditory cheesecake. I'd say maybe that's maybe that's like Boards of Canada, or some sultry singer like Adele, or Lady Gaga, or Beyonce, or Etta James, Otis Redding. So that's a slice of auditory cheesecake. Musical anticipation. I would say that's the drop. That is the drop, like my voice just did. Definitely.